a lot of people say that after the Nixon administration, a lot of that stuff started to bud because,
Well, he would first coin the term
Yeah.
mainstream media.
yeah, and a lot of Republicans back then felt as though they needed a media of their own to counteract what they viewed as the railroading of Richard Nixon. So that eventually led to Fox News, and obviously we're pretty far away from the whole Richard Nixon thing right now. So things have changed quite a bit, but at the end of the day, the media that basically railroaded Richard Nixon with that information, which obviously isn't really railroading because he was guilty as hell, but they have kept that sort of attitude with they jump on whatever they jump on whatever negative coverage of their opponent that they can and whatever positive coverage of their person that they can, and vice versa. So I almost see like where we're at right now with like Fox and MSNBC are essentially like mirror images of each other doing the exact same thing for their team. You know what I mean? And that's why I don't necessarily like the idea of people dogpiling on one media source and saying one media source is bad, because I think all media, especially
They
since
all have
it's,
their own biases.
yeah, and especially because they're funded by people who have agendas, and the fact that you know how there's like limits to how much you can donate to a campaign. I think we've talked about this before, how you can get around this, where if your buddy is with a media station, you essentially can bypass that and get unlimited free advertising and positive coverage, and that does way more than any amount of money into your campaign could ever do.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And but because people have caught on to that game after a while, we start to see independent journalists try to free themselves of being subservient to, like, I guess you could say, the donor class and the corporate media, which is where the internet plays the role and why we have so many alternative media spaces these days. But what I find interesting is in the alternative media, the top dogs in alternative media are still backed by the big corporations and indirectly backed by the parties. But I think that's that adaptation I was talking about, with when the people try to counteract the fact that all the media has agenda, you eventually see the people with those agenda like latch on to the new media and take control of them. And what's interesting about the internet is, since it's basically unlimited TV channels, there's always new media sources coming out, and ones that might have been independent for a while can get latched on at any moment, which is why you see something that started out very independent, like the Young Turks, essentially being like a mirror image of like MSNBC, but on the internet now.
Yeah.
Even though they obviously have a different way that they operate and a slightly different agenda, it still eventually becomes something very closer to that. And why even something that seems a lot more casual, like Louder with Crowder, eventually gets backed by the Koch brothers and sponsored by Glenn Beck and stuff like that. And I don't know, that's just the way that I guess capitalism operates. It's always going to try to latch on to what's profitable, especially when the profits are tied to the narrative.
And that's the point I was trying to make earlier, is that broadcast news cares a lot more about profits, and what equals profits is ratings. So the innovation in the early 2000s that a lot of news organizations came up with was to create conflict where there is none. And how they do this is you put one side against another. In the case of most mainstream news outlets, what they would do is frame the liberal voters versus the conservative voters. So it's what that does is it takes responsibility away from those that are in power and puts it on towards like the American people. So it's not anymore, oh, we're not getting any progress done because, you know, liberals can't take their head out of the sand, get out of la la land, or we can't get anything done because Republicans are living in the 60s. It takes responsibility away from those in power.